Welcome back to the Director's Chair, our weekly live stream forum in which we explore the intersection of leadership and creativity and the sometimes more dramatic tools helpful in leading creatively. Amongst our past topics, we've touched multiple times on leadership as theater, or the practical lessons that we can take from a study of the stage to employ effectively and creatively within our teams and organizations. We've talked about the importance of employing emotion, dramatic effect, and building to moments, as Brian's talked about a couple times, and especially when casting a vision, of course, and rallying our teams behind an idea and working to persuade. Today, we're going to talk about a related creative leadership tool that we've seen employed day to day on an enterprise or even business unit or team level, and at a larger national scale throughout history, and even very recently, and especially in times of change and or even crisis. And that is signaling with dramatic action to set the tone, signal resolve, or even to define what you stand for as a leader and what you will stand for during your tenure in the chair. That might include erecting a symbol to put on display to serve as a reminder of a pivotal event and its importance. This has been prevalent throughout history when nations would erect a stone or other object to serve as a reminder to future generations of a treaty or an alliance established or a miracle performed on their behalf. It might involve removing something that symbolizes a value or priority that you as a leader want your team or organization to move away from as well. It might be a very public action taken by a leader at the outset of her tenure in a new position or office to establish a new tone or to set off on a new path. Or it might simply be publicly leading by example in small and large ways to signal the importance of a recently communicated priority. Whatever form it takes, strong, concrete, and sometimes dramatic signals are an important tool in leadership, as leadership is theater, as Brian's pointed out, on many a level. So I'll open it up here, Tom and Brian. Why is signaling important, and why is it perhaps most effective when done in an appropriately dramatic fashion? What is the importance of this? What do you guys think?
I can start off. I think number one, change, I mean, we brought this up before, change is inherently risky. And human nature is to, for the most part, is to be resistant to that change. And so when you are a new leader and you come on board, there might be people that don't know what that future entails. Is it, what that means for them? How are things going to change, or are they going to be the same? And if you come across with if you're trying to instill change, right? Maybe you want to keep the status quo for a variety of reasons, but if you're trying to establish change, you need to show that you are committed to that. You can't be wishy-washy and say, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because that just establishes the wrong precedent for these people that are confused, don't really know the direction. And by coming across, by doing maybe one of these exaggerated, visible changes, you can you really establish that there is a new regime in charge, hopefully for the better, and that you are committed to this change, and the people under you or on that team should be committed as well.
People, and to that end, people love bold, courageous leadership. And the fact of the matter is, we'll talk about this, there's not a lot of that out there, but people love the classic Kennedy moonshot. They love that sort of thing. And even in the current times, we have a country that is divided and has been more divided than perhaps in recent history. But you have a leader who's, without getting political, who is very strong at his bold statements. Build a wall, whatever that is, that's strong marketing. Without getting political, that is really strong marketing. People love that stuff. And a lot of corporate leaders and other leaders, by the time a bold statement, they may start with a bold statement, but then they lack courage. Then they have strategy and corporate communications and the board. Everyone opines, everyone's voice in it, and then it becomes a whimper. But people love leadership, and dramatic statements are critical.
Yeah, Brian, to your point, I'm even thinking of a recent example, even just in the last week, I think, or so. Was it Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser took a very bold and clear statement, kind of emblazing on the street leading up to the White House on her messaging. right there to just kind of signal resolve on behalf of protesters. And I think that seemed to have been received very, very well. But
along these lines, one of my favorite sayings is, to do your job, you have to be willing to lose your job. And almost no one is. But to really be effective, I don't care if you're a corporate leader, a small business owner, to do your job effectively, you have to be willing to lose it. And to be a star performer, you have to take that tack. And to be a star performer, you have to put a giant stake in the ground, make bold statements around it, knowing that you're going to have your internal competitors, your actual competitors, the politicians. I'm talking about internal politicians shoot dimes at you all day long. So most people are unwilling to make those bold statements because they're not willing to lose their jobs. But to be a high performer, you have to be willing to lose your job.
Brian, I like that a lot. This guy, I always look for our quote of the day. I think we've hit it here in the first 3 minutes. In order to do, and this is maybe even just, it's a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I want to follow it for a second. To do your job, you have to be willing to lose your job. I like that a lot. Tom, what do you think? What does that mean to you?
I mean, I think that is very true. And some of the, the best leaders or the most bold individuals are people that came from nothing. Brian, I know you brought up before Oprah Winfrey, right? Incredibly powerful woman, extremely bold. Anytime that woman gets up and talks, she commands the stage, commands the room. It's just, she is the definition of bold. What did she come from? She came from absolutely nothing. I believe it was like molestation and things at a very early age. It's a very poor, complete poverty. And that's where she's from. That's like, I don't want to say that defines her, but that's very much a part of her essence and defining who she is now, maybe obviously being different than what she came from, but she knows what that's like, and she knows that journey to get there. And she's not doing what she's doing because she's greedy. From my perspective, I don't think she's greedy. I think she loves changing and infecting other people with positivity. And I think that's, to Brian's point, like, she was at the very bottom, right? And she's able to be bold because she knows what it's like to be down there. Is it possible to climb yourself back up? Yeah, absolutely it is. Other people, they get knocked down and they climb back up. If you look at people like Martha Stewart, right? Got in trouble with insider trading, horrendous, and was thrown in jail for a few years. She comes out stronger than ever, right? She does a show with Snoop Dogg and cooking food and things of that nature, and she knows what it's like to be on the bottom, but she's not letting that bottom define her. She's been there, and she knows how to build herself back up. And so to Brian's point, yeah, absolutely, you need to be bold, you need to be courageous to take that step, and if you fail, just climb yourself back out.
Yeah, let's take another recent example. We're in the middle of a once in 100 years pandemic, health crisis. Going back to the political arena, we all play today armchair epidemiologists. So we've all watched Dr. Fauci ad nauseum. We read everything about it. So an example of bold leadership would be, we all hear that it's 18 months to a vaccine. An example might be, if you're the president of the United States, you might say, that's 18 months. We are going to cut it in half. You're going to have a vaccine in 9 months from now, or whatever the cat. We're going to have that. And here's what I'm going to do as president of the United States. We're going to build it. We're going to have that by this date. Period. Full stop. Now, that's a bold statement. The politicians from all sides will come after him if he doesn't make that happen. But that would be an example of a bold statement. If you failed, you're going to take all the arrows in the world, but people will follow and they'll rally behind that agenda. That's an example of one.
Brian, to your point, it's just a couple things I want to draw out. Like, one, Brian, to your point, that may be hugely risky, and many people are hesitant to do that because they're putting it all on the line.
Right.
But people who are willing to do that, most people are not willing to do that. And so when people see someone take that kind of action, they want to follow it. That is truly courageous. And we to your point, we look for, admire, want to follow truly courageous leaders. And Tom, to your point, it's maybe just human nature. We love incredible stories. We love people with incredible stories coming from nothing in that case, or even especially, I think we as people really love comeback stories too.
You love underdogs. Right? Yep.
Yeah, we love the underdog. I mean, take your pick. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me, of course, is Robert Downey Jr. Like just his incredible story, right? And just kind of where he's coming from. That's very, very important. Brian, also to your point there about bold, dramatic statements and commitments, that's throwing down the gauntlet, right? And just saying like, we're going to strong leaders. I've always maintained can sort of like they work to bend reality to their will, right? And sort of like they've put something in place. We're going to meet that. We're going to find a way to make that happen. And I think maybe, Brian, to your point, the reason that strong leaders are able to, maybe like in Steve Jobs' case, have a reality distortion field, I think it was referred to as, they're able to do that because people want to see those commitments realized. And so they will rally behind them. So it really is, and
sometimes when we talk about leadership, we talk about President of the United States, we talk about the Jobs of the world and the Elon Musks of the world. But it also manifests in small unit tactics. For example, if you're a sales manager, a moonshot is, we're going to be the #1 district of 100 at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, however many districts they have. We're going to be #1 every year. Now, that's, having been a chief sales officer, I know how hard it is for a district among many to do that. But if I were a district manager, that's a moonshot. We're going to be #1 every year, which means you're going to have 25, 40, 50% every year. And how do you do that? But then when you make that statement, your 7 to 10 people in your district, now you've got to build value surrounding that. You got to build accountability surrounding that. You've got to be willing to hire and fire.
Yeah.
So a moonshot like that is significant. And there's a reason why most 99.9 will not make that statement, because of what I talked about, the peers, people taking shots at it. Look at, oh, you thought you were so great, so you're so hubristic and all those kinds of things. But those statements are important. And if you make a statement like that, you're, for example, to be the #1 district every year, that's pretty good. You can be a top performer every year. And you might be #1, 2 or 3 out of the years. But those statements are important. People love that kind of stuff.
it comes
Another
back.
thing that I want to bring up is that these bold statements are just as much, not as much as setting a vision, as much as it is that building and a creation of a team. If you're going to be that bold and you're going to set these crazy targets, and maybe I'm looking at someone, I'm more of a complacent type of a character. Am I going to be somebody who's going to be trying really hard to get on that team if I just like complacency and I just like to, get my paycheck and I'm happy there? No, not at all. It's going to be a magnet for those that are other A players that are hard charging, that are aligned with that bold mission, and they want to be a part of their team. They're clawing, they're competing to get there. And so by having these bold statements, you're building that alignment, you're building that teamwork of A players that are completely aligned with that objective of where you want to go. And so a big part of that is just not just creating a bold message and stopping there, right? It's cultivating that teamwork that's always, behind you to get to that finish line.
It's creating something that will attract only the very best, to your point.
I'll give you a personal example. I was president of a company called McGraw-Hill's Higher Education Group for 4 years. After, say, 7 or 8 months, our moonshot was 2012, and I made a statement to the company, and we had it everywhere. We had it when people opened up their computers in the morning, if they had a company-owned phone. We had an all-digital agenda by August 15, 2015. And we got really far into the agenda. We were able to attract, because people love that idea. You have a basal textbook business. Now you're turning into a personalized learning, all digital, beautiful business. And you had a stake in the ground where everyone can see it at every point, every single day. The upshot was we beat the industry by 10 times every year. We crushed all of our goals in the 2 years from after the moonshot, from 13 to 14. Then I moved on to another company. But it was the right agenda. It was public, and I can assure you, internally, you take shots from your president peers, from your industry peers. But if you don't make a statement like that, and you're not willing to take all the shots, you're not going to get anywhere, and you won't be able to attract the Tom Dunns in the world and the Daniel Benches of the world, because they're going to go someplace else that's more exciting. You have to be willing to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's striking me that Brian, Tom, kind of the thread that we followed here is that bold, dramatic statements, and maybe we can circle back to how you do that without words sometimes and how you live those. But bold, dramatic statements are necessary in sort of establishing your North Star as an organization as well, right? It's it puts you in a place where you know exactly what you stand for and how your decisions need to be informed, and what your priorities need to be, all based upon whether or not this is going to get us there. Informs hiring decisions, it informs investment decisions. But in the end, it is, again, I really like that, Brian, moonshot. I'd not heard that before. I'm going to start to employ that now. But those sort of moonshot statements, especially when they're consistently messaged across the organization, just kind of have it at the top of your desk or have it hanging on a banner, keeps everyone aligned and rowing in the same direction. And you're not going to get anywhere unless you have everyone rowing really well in the same direction.
And on this theme, if you have a moonshot, whatever that is, it forces action. It's not just words. So if you have a moonshot, you start evaluating your talent, your culture, your strategy, your capital allocation, and especially and most importantly, your talent. If you have a moonshot, whatever that is for your team, I'll go back to if you're a district sales manager, because sometimes again we get caught up in the idea that we always talk about these wild personalities, the Oprahs of the world, these people who are unicorns, who are massively successful. But if you are looking at, again, at that district manager, if you have a moonshot, it forces you to look at your talent. It forces you to look at your culture. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right culture, the right capital allocation, the right strategy? It forces you to do that. And if you don't take actions, that moonshot is just words, and you will lose your job. And you should lose your job because it's just words. And all those people that followed you will leave you. They don't mind if you miss the moonshot. As long as you took substantial steps and you have achievements along the way, you can always move the guidepost a little bit if you need to. But if you don't take action, if you don't do things that force action, it's just wasted time.
Brian, I love that too, and it's striking me that like it's I guess a bit of the irony perhaps is that people are incredibly afraid. Most, the 99%, as you put it, are afraid to make those moonshot statements for fear of failure. But if you make them, even if you miss them, as long as you pursued them hard and it was very clear and publicly clear that you did so, there may not be any love lost. And you may just survive even if you miss that mark.
There'll be love gained because now you're the leader with grit and grind and can take a punch and energize. There's no love lost at all, even if you miss broadly. But there'll be a lot of success along the way.
One of the previous themes we talked about before is vulnerability, right? And when you make those bold claims, you're inherently exposing yourself, right? You are becoming vulnerable because when you're making those bold claims, they're bold because they might not necessarily have been accomplished before. There might not be, a playbook or a track record of things to do to get there. And because of that, you're making a bold statement. And it's bold because we don't know if it's possible, right? The wider world doesn't know if that's possible. So it is inherently vulnerable. And we talked about the importance of vulnerability in leaders and showing that to your team and realizing that, hey, it's okay, to give it your all. And if you fall shortly, like we're going to build a team around each and every one of us to build us back up. And so it's exposing that vulnerability at the very onset of launching something to create that creative essence and that teamwork to get through, the hardest of times or the best of times.
And maybe even, Tom, to your point, it's like if you're even acknowledging and you're just very open, in fact, that look, I don't even know for certain that this is possible, but I believe that it is. And you're sort of even giving yourself an out there at the beginning, even when you're making that moonshot statement, to Brian's point.
Yeah, 8 years ago, I'm sure Elon Musk didn't plan that, 2 weeks ago we would be sending, people on a privately funded through NASA, right? But he made that bold statement and executed on it. He got people on board to do it. Similarly, it could be said about JFK. I want to be on the moon in 10 years. Everyone's like, what? Moon, is that? And sure enough, people did it. Right? These are examples of it succeeding. There are many times when it fails, but I think you're pushing the envelope, pushing it further, and making it that much more easier for someone to push the envelope even further. And that's like the beauty of America and innovation and what drives us and what drives like the culture.
You're making me feel very patriotic here at this moment, Tom, and I desperately needed to feel that way. So thank you. So those are quite literally JFK and Elon Musk. Those are quite literally, Brian, to your point, moonshot statements. Right, as well. So
I would say today, with all the distractions that we've had, there's never been a better time in human history to innovate, communicate. There's never been a better time. There's also never been a more difficult time to cut through the chaff. I used to say, for example, that attention deficit disorder kicks in an audience in 30 seconds. Now I'm down to 8 seconds. So how do you cut through that noise as a team leader, as a small unit team leader, or as a vice president or senior vice president or a C-suite executive without making whatever your version of a moonshot is? Keep in mind that your audience will listen to you for 8 seconds. Maybe your audience is your employees as well before they start tuning out.
Yeah, it's this. I'm glad we followed this thread. In fact, Peter just chimed in here, and Peter, thank you again for listening. And just the point. I guess this is coming back to something we've talked about before, and some consistent threads that we've hit in terms of the qualities that really great leaders have. Is they're highly courageous, right? I mean, that fear of failure is what will hold you back. You miss, again, Peter, to your point, 100% of the shots you don't take. And so many people are afraid to take those shots. So
Can I give you another current example?
Let's do it.
So we at N2, we do a lot of work with college universities. And as you know, I've spent the vast majority of my life in education, leading higher education and ed tech companies. Mm-hmm. So there's a professor, obviously we know that all businesses have been impacted right now, and colleges and universities, there's 4,200 in the United States, and they're all in a statement, they're trying to figure out survival. So part of these moonshots are about inspiring, creative, even tension-filled conversations. So there's a professor at NYU. His name is Professor Galloway. He's been all over the news recently. He had predicted, apparently, the fact that WeWork's valuation of something like $47 billion was crazy, and then a month later it all fell apart. So Professor Galloway is a marketing professor at NYU, and he said recently that the world at some point soon, several years, may be dominated by a number of cyborg universities. A Facebook might be attached to a Harvard or a Stanford, and that thousands of college universities will go out of business. Now, that's a form of a moonshot. And naturally, those kinds of statements are going to inspire incredible debate. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Fair.
And that's what a moonshot does. If I were a college university president, because whether there's 100% truth in what he's saying, there's certainly somewhere in the continuum of 10% to 70%. And that should be a call to action. And it's not a new call, but that kind of a moonshot, even if it's somewhat of a negative, disruptive moonshot, is important. And it's a call to action. It's a call to creativity. It's a call to leadership. I think those things are incredibly important.
So maybe, Brian, to your point, a really good, effective rallying moonshot will, by its very nature, be controversial on some level, and might even, maybe not always, but will be somewhat divisive, maybe for some, in that it may also even heighten a sense of urgency around something, just maybe underscore the importance of doing something for the sake of survival, or just simply to achieve greatness as well.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I hadn't heard that before, but a form of moonshot is always going to be potentially divisive and controversial, and I think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Number one, it is divisive, right? If you are an organization and you've been going one direction, and say there's a change in regime, or at the top of the organization, there's someone new, it is divisive, right? Not everyone, but there are certain people that were lined up perfectly for the way that company was going. But now that there's new leadership involved, maybe those golden players are no longer going to be the star child anymore, and it might be these other individuals. So it is divisive. It is going to cause that dissension in a group, in a team. But at the end goal is not to create division, right? The end goal is to point the direction of the ship into a better course of ocean. Perfect example would be Uber, right? 2017, founder Travis Kalanick, they ousted him. They said, okay, you're the founder. You built this multi-billion organization, but you are toxic for this team, and they fired him, right? It was a very much they call it it was like a bro culture, right? There was sexual harassment, different things like that. Now, if you're a male and in that type of organization, and Travis is gone, I might feel a little bit, little bit of division. Like, oh crap, I was the golden child and now I'm not. Now it's, but for good reason, right? So division is not necessarily bad, right? There could be a good outcome. And so when the new CEO came in, Dara, I can't even pronounce his last name. It's a tough one.
Yeah,
Shahi or something like that. So when he came in, just completely different, right? He had roundtable discussions. He had conversations with women engineers, with drivers, with people who worked at the customer like phone lines, things of that nature, and just brought in values, different things of that nature. And would that cause division from people that were there in that bro culture? Yeah, you bet it would. But that's not a bad thing, right? That's a good thing. You're getting more people on the team that are for this, for this better course of action that Uber ended up taking.
Tom, I think to your point, we're kind of coming back to like this is echoing something, Brian, you hit on some earlier sessions, being the importance of tension. And tension can break apart, but it can also really bring people together. And really creative leaders will have the ability to see how they can leverage tension to their advantage, to actually bring people together and actually keep the ship afloat as well.
Right.
Brian,
I'll give you an example. I'll go back to this McGraw-Hill model about the all digital by a certain date agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to expose and divide for a purpose. Because if you have a business that had been around for 100 years and has been doing things the same way for nearly ever,
mm-hmm.
by putting that stake in the ground, you are naturally going to separate people who say, I don't want to do that. I don't have the skills for it. But more importantly, I am unwilling to learn the new skills to be successful to support that agenda. So yes, that is a strategy to expose those who are going to be on the bus to learn new skills and to be a part of this, and those who just simply don't care to be. And the job of a CEO or president is to, here's the agenda,
mm-hmm.
here's where we're going. I'm accountable for everything, and I need these types of people to help us get there. And if you want to be a part of that, so by putting a stake in the ground, you do expose people who want to be a part of it, and they will tell you that. And one way or another, they will tell you that.
So Brian, I think what we're getting at is like those bold statements also serve as a tool for the leader to do one of the most important things that they will need to do with their teams, which is, I guess there's no way around it, to separate the wheat from the chaff, to really make sure you have the best people on the team, and those that are not prepared to commit, might be time to get off the bus.
Yeah.
And bold statements will help to serve that purpose.
Think about if you're in central control, if you're in Houston in the early 60s, mid 60s, and you hear that, if you're like, well, we can send a probe, and you're like, I don't know, it's all BS and things like that, then the job of a leader is to see how serious you are about your arm folding. And if you are serious about it, you got to go.
It's a good point. Good point.
Brian, you get that division real fast.
I would love to follow, Brian, one of your notes before about the example with McGraw-Hill also serves to highlight something I think that is very related here and very important around the theme of messaging overall. And you talked about how with the moonshot statement that you established for McGraw-Hill, you had that kind of emblazoned at the top people's minds. It was consistently there. It was at the forefront. And I think I'll pause it here for a second, that really great leaders do communication, of course, really well. But one specific thing they do is keep that constant 1, 2, or 3 points top of mind always, and draw it back to that and keep that. It's something that it's a platform they stand on, and they're constantly hitting that. It maybe even become annoying at times, but really good leaders will continue drawing things back to that moonshot statement in various different ways to keep that top of mind. They have a platform. It's very clear what they stand for. And even say what you will about the current administration, I think that one thing was clear from the outset: there was a platform there, and it was always kind of out in front in various different shapes and forms. Why is that important? And maybe Brian, if you've got other examples there, or Tom, even from your past experience, like how have you seen that employed? When has it been most effective? What can we as leaders do to keep that message top of mind?
I'll start. It has to do with trust. most people, many people, do not expect leaders to do what they say they're going to do. And I'll go back to an organization without naming the name. I always tell people, never ever misrepresent yourself in an interview process. And if you're a senior leader and you have an agenda, let people know in the interview process who you are and what you plan to do, because you don't want to be in a situation 3 or 4 months from now where the board or whomever says, where did this come from? You didn't say you were going to do that. So it's really important to build trust. I remember I had a conversation with a CFO at an organization who wasn't a part of the interview process for me. And I said, listen, XYZ, I said I was going to do exactly that in the interview process. And he said to me, you know, Brian, people like you say they're going to do things in an interview, and we just think you're selling yourselves. We don't actually expect you to do that. So my point is this: you have to build trust. And the reason why you set a stake in the ground and you keep going after it and you keep measuring things for that is because you're building trust. You're building a stake. You're doing all those things. Let's take our current president. Like him, don't like him. He's got his constituency, and he said, I'm going to build a wall. And he's wall. And he's thinking to the election, I built this wall, or I didn't build this wall, or here are the objections. He's been, like him or not, he's been consistent about those. I'm not saying that's a good thing at all. I'm just saying that those kinds of things are really important stakes in the ground in terms of building trust.
And even maybe, Brian, to your point, it's like, even if someone's not going to completely agree with your agenda, the fact that you're transparent about your agenda, what you stand for, will engender trust even with your enemies, to the extent we want to call them that.
Well done. Well done, Professor Bentel. Exactly.
That's good. So as we're coming back to kind of thinking through the importance of signaling here and messaging and having a bold statement to stand behind, these moonshots, if you will, what are some? I want to get at maybe the importance of signaling with some of those things too. So the things you do that maybe don't have words attached to them, that serve to demonstrate your resolve or your action, and why maybe those are even more powerful in some cases than bold, dramatic words that you might put out there as well. I'll give you an example. Maybe even one that I heard about recently and kind of considering this. Even at a business unit or an enterprise level, a new manager comes in, right? They're coming into a situation where there may have been previously distrust amongst a team in the previous leader. There was kind of fractured feelings. It was just, overall the emotional state of the team was not where it needed to be, and that was clear. When you're stepping into a situation like that, I might argue that statements, nonverbal statements about what you stand for, may serve more to be more effective than words in many cases. In many cases, maybe taking point. A new manager is kind of coming into. I heard of an example where a new manager was coming into a situation where one of the immediate things he did was in the parking lot to remove from the parking lot the signs kind of reserved for management. Just tore them out day one. Was the first thing he did, which of course in that case is kind of sending a message that we're all on the same team. No one's more important than anyone else, and we're in this together. And didn't need to say anything at all. But are things like that important, and maybe and are they effective? And if so, why? So, what do you think?
For me, I mean, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? That's not just like an idiom that was just pulled out of nowhere, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think it's able to convey meaning a lot more and resound in people's. It burns a spot in people's memory a lot more than like a diatribe of words would ever do. And so that's number one. Number two, one thing that I always say is like, stop talking about it, be about it. Right? It's like, don't talk about it, be about it. It's like, words are one thing, but practice what you preach. Actually put that into action. I think that just shows the commitment of you as a leader to the cause that you are behind. I'm trying to think of just an example of leader. You come back to me. I'll come. I have an example of a leader that did that. It's just gonna. It's not on the top of my head. I have to kind of think about it.
While you're doing that, Tom, let me share something. So back to the signaling. I ran this large company once. In early days, I had a very powerful. Even though you're the CEO, you can have very powerful constituents rather, and they can report directly to you. So I had this early days in this company. Someone said, "You will never get XYZ to be on time." I said, "The time is very important to me, obviously." And I said, "Huh." Didn't say anything. We'll see about that. So I had a team meeting 3 days later. I just locked the door. Period. And he waited outside for an hour and a half. And that's called signaling. He wasn't late for a meeting again. Now, we hear about college professors. They should teach timeliness to their students. I had professors who, class starts at 10, doors are locked. I love that. That's signaling.
Yeah.
Those things are really important.
Tom, I'm curious whether or not this was the case for you, but to Brian's point, I know at the Olin Business School at WashU, we were the same way. Like I remember one of my favorite professors, Todd, Melbourne, he did that in finance, in our base level finance class. It was like the door was locked 10 minutes after. No one was coming in afterwards, which is an important signaling mechanism.
Yeah, I can remember one of my classes in business school. To your point, somebody was, I think, like a minute and a half late, and the door that they came in, and so it was like stadium seating, right? The door that they came in, so if they sat in the front left of the class, they came in the back right door, and professor was in the middle of talking and just stopped. Watched an individual come in. The person was like a deer in headlights, right? But then like continued to walk and had to go through the complete diagonal to the other side, front of the room, front left corner where his seat was. And everything just paused, like complete silence, absolutely nothing. And until that person sat down and got his books out, then he began again. And it just showed like, wow, I do not want that ever to be me, and it will never be me. At the end of the day, you don't want to, pause or hold up 90-something people's education when they're paying, thousands of dollars for it. And so it was just a very stark, difference to how he was professing, and then a very, very great guy, very smart, intellectual, and not stern or anything like that. But he made his point.
It's making me just. Tom, there are so many examples we could provide of this, right? This like the importance of showing, not telling, to Peter's point just now, but like the importance of as painful as it might be to watch that example play out at an individual level, examples are sometimes necessary to demonstrate resolve. That was maybe it's unfortunate that maybe so and so had to be singled out, maybe their own fault. But it serves as a message to everyone else about the importance of something.
If I can offer signal, I love this topic of signaling because it has a lot to do with moonshots. I mentioned this Professor Galloway from NYU. Mm-hmm. So he's been on various shows, MSNBC, he's been everywhere. So if I were a college university president, I would get my team together and I would play. Not just send over, what do you think about, I would play Galloway's interviews and I would say, this is signaling, is this us? Or some version of that. So that's a form of signaling. And I don't know. So these kinds of things are just critically important to understand your moments and to take those moments, whether it's a moonshot or signaling around a moonshot or signaling around disruption in your particular industry, but take every opportunity to do those big signals. Like this Galloway thing would be.
Yes, signaling is not just negative too. Like there is some very positive signaling, and so one of them is reward. So one of the things that I use in the military all the time were awards, and these are ribbons that soldiers are presented, and there's a ceremony, and they get to wear it on their uniform and portray it. And those are big enforcing mechanisms where everyone's like, oh, I want to be awarded like that. I can do that, and it instills like a lot of excitement and ambition, and for people to drive and push harder. And so it's not all about negativity, right? There are many ways to punish people, but it's also about positivity and rewarding that good performance.
No, thank you for drawing that out, Tom.
It's interesting that you said that. So if you have an agenda like an all digital agenda, and you might have 1,000 salespeople, you might have an award. We didn't do this, but it's a good idea, Tom. We should have. If you have 1,000 salespeople and one territory is already all digital, you have an all digital award. You're signaling all the time. So I love that that example from the military.
And Brian, Tom, to your points, it serves to bring people together as well. And it's kind of an excuse to do that. Like our game ball presentations that Dan instituted immediately kind of serves it's a reason to bring people together.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect example where actions are stronger than words, right? People can get, hey, attaboy, good job. It's like, but then it starts like having emptiness to it, unless there's something behind it. It's like, okay, well, I keep busting my butt and all I'm getting is a good job. Like, give me something else, right? Give me something else to look forward to, or to keep this, constant pressure on my life, on everything else, because I'm committing to this, right? There needs to be something besides just a good job. And I think as leaders, we owe that to people that are under us. And
these kind of signals, rewards, or what have you, are, again, in some ways like nonverbal demonstrations of what matters to you and following a goal, Brian, in the case you mentioned with McGraw-Hill, of getting to be all digital. And it seems like, I might pause it here for your reaction, that like when there are periods of intense change, especially like we talked about at the beginning, where you're setting off in a new direction and you've established a moonshot, people are concerned about what that might mean for them individually, and the culture of the company or what have you. People are looking for a degree of comfort. They're looking for solidarity. They're looking for some sense that everything's going to be okay. They're looking for signals. And as a leader, you have a disproportionate power to shape those signals. And so signaling needs to be important to you too, maybe in very public ways, to demonstrate what your values are, and to live the values for those around you as well. What do you guys think? Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I have nothing to add.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess I don't know that you could really disagree. But I'll give it an example here and just call out.
You said there in terms of making sure that people understand that everything is going to be okay. To me, that's nuanced. How I approach that with some of the signaling that I've done, the all digital example might be one, because you can't guarantee that everything's going to be okay. So, but how things are okay is the new skills that team members learn towards achieving that moonshot means that they will always be okay, because they're learning new skills, building new networks, creating a different story that will make them more marketable, will make them more interesting, not only in the company, but outside the company to current industries and other industries. So you can't guarantee that things will be okay, but you can help people understand that they will be okay for sure. If they take this journey with you, they will be more than okay. That's one way to think about it.
Helps to engender trust as well if they see you living out what you have stated and you're asking them to do.
True.
Of course, as well. So, and Tom, I imagine this is probably very prevalent in your own background as a combat officer, is like you never ask your people to do something you're not prepared to do yourself. Living that out. So.
Nor would I ask someone to do something where I didn't know how much time or effort it would take. I mean, just blindly, ignorantly giving an order that you have no idea how long it's going to take him or her to do it. Like that's not good leadership at all, right? You should be fully aware of what it takes in order to get something done before you give that command.
Yeah. I'll maybe, Brian, I'll take your cue and I'll provide maybe an example here as well. And one where I failed. One of the things I've realized in past is like, we'd often talk about the importance of work-life balance. And it's important here. And I've talked about it in past roles as well, and taking time to rest and recharge. But I've never been very good at that. And, sending the occasional email at 3 o'clock in the morning or what have you, kind of sends the wrong signal to your team sometimes too, and can kind of keep you in kind of a heightened mode as a group of urgency all the time. And you can't always be in that mode. You need to signal, if that's important to you and something you're talking about, you need to signal by your own actions that there is a time to shut things off. There is a time to rest and recharge. And one of the things I've appreciated even here, and I'll call out our mutual friend, Tony Morales, for a second. Like he's done something for me and our team that I think was very important. Like we talked about, the importance of taking time to recharge and rest, and he led by example. He's in some cases, like he asked us to take some time away and rest and recharge and take advantage of some PTO, and he did that in a very visible way, and that was important, and I think helpful for everyone in seeing that. Look, that's something that's important to the organization, and that's being lived out. So we're expected to do the same. So let's follow that, and we'll be better for it as well. So.
How do you guys think through on this topic of, oftentimes we talk about senior leaders providing a moonshot, but what about individual moonshots? Every year, people go through their New Year's resolutions, 90-some crazy % don't achieve any of it. How do you guys think about this in relation to individual moonshots? And good examples of people taking that shot. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Dan. You go for it.
No, it's you've got one top of mind, so fire at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think where a lot of people fail as individuals and as leaders for that matter is they set those moonshots, but then they don't. So that's a great long-term goal, but they don't do small, medium-term goals or like check-in points or anything like that. And I think that's just as important as that end of the, time frame goal. You need to really keep yourself accountable to it, which I think a lot of people are either lazy and they don't want to go about like building out those individual steps. I fall guilty to it too, so I'm not just like pointing a finger. But it's just people want that end result, but they don't want to do the short-term quick wins in order to get there. They think it more as this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to do it. It's like, well, no. Like anything, it takes work, it takes commitment. And that's when we get into the communication part of like an overall company goal or whatever. And there's 4 phrases or whatever it is that, people can go back to and remember. I think a lot of people fail on the communication part because they're not really communicating to themselves, like, believe it or not.
Yeah. Seems like it comes back to, Tom, to your point. It's and Brian, in answer to your question, I think they're important because it's a way to self-manage too. And you need to, again, we talked about this before, the importance of knowing thyself in order to be able to lead effectively. We've got to be managing ourselves first to be very effective at doing that before we're ever going to be equipped or prepared to lead others as well. So I think it's
well, this conversation has inspired me because one of my individual moonshots is I'm 54 and I want to be a soul cycle instructor. I don't know if they'll accept one part-time, but I set that goal about a year ago and I've got to recast that goal. That's my moonshot. So I'd like to thank you guys for that. I haven't had enough individual points, my rhythm and cadence when I'm cycling. I got so much work to do, but that's my moonshot. So you got to think about that in a year. How are you doing with your moonshot of being a soul cycle instructor? And I'll let you know.
We'll have to come back.
Yeah, but Brian, to that point, it's like, okay, well, every morning I'm going to wake up and I'll start with 30-minute workouts, and then from 30 I'll build up to 45, then maybe I'll get to an hour. And you set the time aside, you put time on your calendar it's not a year you're going to wake up and be a soul cycle instructor, right? It's you really got to build it up and you got to police yourself, hold yourself accountable, which some people don't always do.
Tom, that's a good reminder, and something like I feel challenged by that comment right there, because I think, Tom, to your point, if we just set out lofty moonshot goals for ourselves without incremental goals, and we'll get discouraged, we'll never achieve them. And so we've got to set realistic incremental goals for ourselves if we're ever going to achieve the end goal. And that's, more important maybe for some than others, but like you will lose, the wind will come out of your sails if you don't do that effectively. So, well, guys, thank you. I think this is, I've really enjoyed this discussion this morning. So let me see if I can summarize here for us. But Brian, I think our quote of the day absolutely was like, in order to do your job well, you have to be willing to lose your job. And I hadn't considered that as intentionally as all of that until you'd said that. But I think that has kind of helped to inform a lot of this discussion, in as much as you've got to really be willing to fully commit in order to get others to commit to your direction. And it all comes back to that willingness to take risks. It comes back to courage, right? Which is one of the qualities we've talked about in many sessions prior. And courageous leaders are willing to throw down the gauntlet, right? They're willing to establish a moonshot, Brian, to your point, because many and people are inspired by that, because 99% won't do that. But if you establish that moonshot, it can do a number of things for you. It can serve as your North Star. It can help to inform, it can inspire your team and bring them together. It can create some intention, and it might be somewhat divisive or even controversial, but tension is important, as we've talked about in previous sessions. And it is a way with a really good galvanizing moonshot to bring your team together as well. It kind of forces action, Brian, to your point as well. But in order to achieve that, you've got to have really strong messaging and be consistent about that, and kind of have it top of mind for people if you're going to get there. And maybe even important, not just at an individual level, but maybe at a group level, Tom, are those incremental goals that we need to hit in getting closer to that moonshot. And a reminder that, hey, we're doing well. We're on track. We have hit X, Y, and Z, and this will help us in getting there. That's important for people too. And something that we have to constantly do as we're moving through. And I think the last point that was really salient for me as well was, Tom, your point about vulnerability, right? And if we've talked about that so many times as well, but even those moonshots that so many people are so afraid to take, I guess the irony there, like we talked about, was that if you are truly vulnerable about that up front, and as long as you really strive after that in your actions, you've lived out your commitments in your actions, even if you don't make that moonshot, the irony is you might even be better off for it. And your people will have seen your resolve and your grit, and you become that leader through those actions as well. So, well, gentlemen, thank you. This has been fun. And I will be sure to wear a rust-colored shirt next time.
You missed the memo, Dan. You missed the memo.
You can't be assured next week we'll be wearing blue. So you go ahead and help yourself.
Thank you for the heads up. And maybe next week we'll talk about the importance of the ability to see around corners. Brian,
you see.
So that's good. Well, guys, thank you very much, and thank you all to who joined us today. As you may or may not be aware, we have content at 11 a.m. Eastern every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, right here at N2 Growth, and we'll be back again next Thursday here on the Director's Chair. So we hope you'll join us, and we'll see you then.
Thank you, team.
All right, quick, guys. Be safe.